Today I want to begin a series of 3 sermons that center around the subject of church growth. As I said earlier, our vestry warden spent a great half day yesterday looking primarily at this subject of growth and how we might reach out to this community and grow both in number and in spirit. So today I'm going to be preaching about the importance of the church as being recognized as a family of believers. One of my favorite cartoons every day is the Family Circus. Creator Bill Keane died last year, but he obviously understood, had a good feeling for what goes on in families and the unintended humor that kids come up with sometimes in everyday family situations. It's a story about a teacher who asked her second graders to write letters to God. One youngster wrote, "Dear God, it rained for our whole vacation, and is my father mad? He said some things about you that people are not supposed to say, but I hope you will not hurt him anyway." Another kid penned, "Dear God, is it true my father won't get in heaven if he uses his bowling words in the house?" And then, "Dear God, maybe Cain and Abel would not kill each other so much if they had their own rooms. It works with my brother." And "Dear God, did you really mean do unto others as they do unto you? Because if you did, boy, am I going to fix my brother." And finally this, "Dear God, I bet it's very hard for you to love all of everybody in the whole world. There are only 4 people in our family, and I never can do it." You know, Christian churches throughout the world nowadays are hurting as far as growth is concerned. Even the Southern Baptists, who are very prolific in this part of the country, suggest that 70% of their churches have either declined or experienced no growth at all in the last several years. Now, there are churches that grow, and there are reasons that they grow. So I wanted to spend a little time this morning looking at some of the characteristics of successfully growing churches. Bill Day, who is the numbers cruncher and evangelism professor at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, gives his definition of growing, declining, and plateauing. The church, he says, that increases 10% in a 5-year period is growing. On the other hand, decline 10% in the same 5-year period, and your church is decreasing. Plateauing simply means that your church fits into the group. Now, to fully understand how God expects His church to function, we have to go back to the early church. We have to go back to the church that Paul wrote about. The church first organized by Peter and described by Luke in Acts 2:42 through 47, where Luke writes this about the church. "And they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship, and in breaking of bread, and in prayers. And fear came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were done by the apostles." Now, this verse is very important. "And all that believed were together, and had all things in common. And the Lord added to the church daily, as such should be saved." When I prepared for yesterday's vestry retreat, I compared several internet articles that had to do with successful growth in churches, and I put those in a corkboard in the parish hall if you'd like to look at them after church today. And one of the common characteristics of growing churches is the fact that they really enjoy worshiping together. The worship experience is meaningful to them. The church of the first century, though, was centered around several things. Worship being their primary activity, and And during that worship, they spent a lot of time on teaching and doctrine. Understand now that these new Christians were struggling for their identity. It was important not only for those who were there, but for those who were to follow, that a clear and unwavering understanding of Jesus' message had to be established. There couldn't be any question about their doctrine, what they believed. They had to rely on the eyewitness accounts of those who knew Jesus. It was a group of people who understood that it was impossible, that it was important that they learn as much as possible about this man they were following. They had to understand as much as they could about this religion they had embraced if they were going to grow and survive and to attend to the Great Commission that their Lord had given them. Secondly, they were a church of fellowship. It was important that they band together as brothers. Now, the early church, of course, took place mostly in homes of people. And if their movement was to flourish, they had to develop this sense of togetherness and share in the lives of others who believed as they did. And they did this by worshiping together and breaking bread. Now, the breaking bread should not be necessarily confused with the Lord's Supper, although most assuredly they were trained to do that and practiced it on a regular basis. But since the worship services probably moved from house to house, they frequently visited and had meals together. And in doing so, they became more closely knit, more closely bound together through the bonds of Christian love. And it was that breaking of bread that became a symbol of their love and devotion to one another and to the Lord they followed. What did Paul relate to us in today's epistle lesson that Jim read to us shortly ago? Be kindly affectioned one to another with brotherly love and honor, preferring one another. Finally, they were a praying church. Those early Christians quickly came to the realization that they were not capable of sustaining their efforts on their own. They understood immediately the importance and the necessity of prayer. Once again, we rely on Paul. He said, be patient in tribulation, continuing instant in prayer. These things that were critical in the formation and development of the early church, teaching of the doctrine, fellowship, and prayer, are just as important today as they were over 2,000 years ago. So is it any wonder that churches nowadays who follow those ancient guidelines are the ones most likely to be successful in the world in which we live? Now let's take a closer look at some of those things. First of all, let's take a look at the importance of teaching and understanding of doctrine. Doctrine is that in which we profess our beliefs. Now, I can stand up here every Sunday and preach to you a 15 to 20 minute sermon, maybe a slightly shorter homily on Wednesdays. And I try to make my sermons and my homilies as interesting and as meaningful as possible. But when I kneel before this altar prior to my sermon every Sunday, I pray that God will inspire me to say something that will be worthwhile to you and acceptable to Him. But that in which we believe, the doctrine of our church, is much more than an inspirational sermon. The faith that endures, the faith that sustains us in the darkest hours of our lives, comes from something more than a few minutes of inspiration from Canon Jones on Sunday morning. The enduring and sustaining faith comes from knowing and understanding the truth about God. If we don't understand why we profess our belief in Jesus Christ, then we're just talking about words on a piece of paper. In his book, Life Together, Dietrich Bonhoeffer appealed to a variety of biblical references that point to the fact that community with fellow worshipers of Jesus is a crucial element of Christianity. For example, Bonhoeffer begins chapter 1 with a quotation from the 133rd Psalm. Behold how good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell in unity. That song is a song of ascents. It is spoke of pilgrims who are coming together to worship together, meeting in Jerusalem so that they may seek a lofty experience. Worshiping together is important for several reasons. You know, there's a trend towards isolationism and disengagement in the world today. There are lots of lonely people all around us. Sociologists say research shows that Americans are participating less in all kinds of social activities. They're reading fewer newspapers and magazines. They're attending less political meetings. They're signing fewer petitions. They're writing fewer letters to editors. They're attending fewer club meetings. They're entertaining less friends in their homes. They're attending fewer worship services and eating less blood. Now, older generations of people, and I'm very comfortable among older people, being one. Those born, let's say, before 1945 are much more likely to be engaged in civic activities than are the baby boomers of their offspring. Now, here's a rather sad phenomenon. There are at least more than 800 million active users of Facebook. And at least half of those folks log on to Facebook in any given day. And the active user of Facebook has at least 130 Facebook friends. Why? Because it gives them a platform on which to do something at most any time, most anywhere, and it fills the most basic need for attention and appreciation. You see, Facebook is electronic fellowship. And when we experience fellowship and community in the church, real person-to-person, face-to-face fellowship, we are experiencing the heartbeat of Christianity. And then prayer is an essential element in the successful and growing church. You see, prayer is the key that opens the door to God. And we're to pray constantly and specifically. You may have heard about the little boy who prayed for someone to play with. He had to amend his prayer by saying, "Dear God, thank you for the baby brother, but what I really wanted was a puppy." Prayer should be specific. Prayer is the power behind our faith. And if we're to be effective in our growth as a church and as individuals, we have to be people who pray and pray constantly and pray specifically. Church growth has a lot to do with evangelism. The spreading of the gospel, that's what evangelism is all about. Evangelism gets a bad rap. People think of street corner preachers when you talk about evangelism. Evangelism is simply following Christ's great commandment: go forth, preach, teach, bring others to Jesus Christ. I read something a while back that said, without effective prayer, you cannot be effective in your evangelism. Period. It said, don't even try it without prayer. It says, sharing your faith without praying for the person is like training a pig to fly. All you're going to do is waste your time and annoy the pig. All you're going to accomplish if you're trying to do evangelism without prayer is distance yourself from God, waste your time, and annoy the person. Now, isn't that true? If you're trying to lead someone to Christ, you have to learn to do that prayerfully. If you don't do it prayerfully, you're trying to do the work of God without God. Now, Paul closed today's epistle lesson with these words, rejoice with them that rejoice, and weep with them that weep. I think that's God's will for His church. We have to be glad when others rejoice, and we have to be moved with compassion when they weep. You see, when we come to that kind of understanding, we not only can be successful in sharing the joy and comfort of Jesus Christ with others, but we also now put on display, you see, the love that attracts other folks to us. We have to show other people that we are a family. We're a family that loves every member of the family, regardless of the warts or the shortcomings, the disagreements, whatever. We have to convince people that we are a family dedicated to loving each other for one reason. Because that's what Jesus Christ told us to do. Learn and pray. Those are the characteristics of a growing church. Those are the characteristics of a loving family.